Okay, students. So yesterday we were studying about the diffusion across cell membrane, right? Now the living cells, the principle in living cells of the movement down the concentration gradient is same. For example, this is a cell membrane, right? So this is a cell membrane of a cell, and it is surrounded, like the cell is surrounded by a cell membrane. Now, what's the function of that cell membrane? That it restricts the free movement of molecules, right? And due to that, we call it a partially permeable membrane. Now, what does that mean? That means that it allows some molecules to pass easily, but others with difficulty or not at all, right? And what is the basis of selection, right? How does the cell membrane decide what molecules will pass through the cell membrane or what molecules will not pass through the cell membrane, right? So the bases are that normally the simple sort of selection is that is based on the size of the molecules, right? It allows the smaller molecules to pass through the cell membrane while the larger molecules couldn't pass this membrane. For example, the small molecules, right, like carbon dioxide, oxygen, and H2O, right? They can pass through the cell membrane easily. And due to diffusion, now diffusion tends to balance the concentration of these molecules inside and outside the cell all the time, right? So what is the purpose of diffusion? That the molecules will pass from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, right? Is that clear?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay, Numan, are you able to understand this?
Yes, ma'am.
I hope that's more clear now. Okay. Now we have to see how diffusion helps living organisms in different ways. For example, this diffusion helps living organisms. So this diffusion helps living organisms to obtain many of their requirements, right? It wants to fulfill requirement of different molecules. So that is facilitated by diffusion. It helps to get rid of many of their waste products, and it helps to carry out gas exchange for respiration. For example, have a look at this. There are two cells, right? For example, in the first cell, both are the animal cells, right? We have the nucleuses over here. Now, what happens in the first case? There is now we know in case of aerobic respiration, oxygen is used, right? Now, when oxygen is being used in case of aerobic respiration, as oxygen is being used up, so inside the cell, the concentration of oxygen will decrease, right? And if the concentration of oxygen is going to get decreased inside this animal cell, what will happen then? As this O2 or the oxygen will be in more concentration outside the cell, so the molecules of oxygen, they will start entering the cell, right? To fulfill the requirement of O2 and to balance the concentration of O2 inside and outside of the cell. Is that clear? Is that clear, Mipsam and Noman?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So please, Noman, Mipsam already knows, but just for you, if you have any question, ask me right away, right? Okay. And this is the example of another animal cell. For example, again, now we know as a product of respiration, carbon dioxide is produced inside the cell. So as the cell is respiring, more and more carbon dioxide will be produced inside the cell, right? When the carbon dioxide will increase in concentration inside this cell, now the carbon dioxide is in high concentration inside the cell as compared to outside the cell where it will be in low concentration. So this carbon dioxide will start moving towards the outside of the cell in order to balance the concentration of carbon dioxide inside and outside of the cell. Is that clear? Now, in case of solutes, now some mineral ions in the solution, for example, nitrates and magnesium, they are mostly absorbed by the roots, but not by diffusion, but they are absorbed by the roots with the help of an active transport, right? That we will study about in the later topics. Now we can see the importance of diffusion of gases and solutes. So first, what we have to see, like we have to see the example of diffusion in different organisms and body parts. For example, in case of small intestine, right? In case of small intestine, what molecules are actually diffused into and outside? They are the products of digested food that are such as glucose and amino acids, right? Now, in small intestine, we have the what happens when you eat a certain thing, right? We know that it is digested by the digestive system, and inside the small intestine, we have the products of that digested food in the form of glucose and amino acids. Now, what happens that those glucose and amino acids have to move from the lumen of small intestine towards the blood in villi capillaries. Let me draw that for you. For example, consider this is a lumen of small intestine, right? And here we have the villi. Have you seen this image before?
Yes.
Okay. So, for example, inside the lumen, you had glucose and amino acids. Now, what happens? That this glucose and amino acid has to get into the bloodstream. For that, it will move towards the blood that is in, I'll make this, okay, that is in, that is present in the villi capillaries, right? So that is also facilitated with the help of diffusion. Now, in case of plants, we can take an example of leaf. Okay, let's take an example of leaf. In case of leaf, we have carbon dioxide. We know that carbon dioxide has to move from the air spaces between the mesophyll cells to the chloroplasts in mesophyll or palisade cells for what? For photosynthesis. And same is the case with oxygen as well. Again, in case of leaf, we have oxygen that has to move from the air spaces between the mesophyll cells towards the mitochondria of mesophyll cells, and that is for respiration, right? Let's consider this picture. Okay, so we know that in case of carbon dioxide moves from the air spaces between the mesophyll cells. So here, these are the mesophyll cells, right? Here we have, these are mesophyll cells. Now we know that there is an empty space between the mesophyll cells. So in case of carbon dioxide, it moves from the air spaces between the mesophyll cells to the mitochondria of mesophyll cells. uh, okay, sorry. In case of carbon dioxide, it will move to the chloroplast in mesophyll cells, right? These mesophyll cells have the chloroplast as well. So they
Ma'am,
will
can you
move.
explain that again?
Okay, I was telling you, like, I was telling you that you know that the carbon dioxide and oxygen, they are also diffused inside this plant structure. Let's consider that here we have the empty spaces between the spongy mesophyll cells, right? These are the spongy mesophyll cells. Now, what happens that the carbon dioxide that is present between these spongy mesophyll cells has to get inside the mesophyll cells and into the chloroplast of mesophyll cells, right? Where what has happened?
Photos,
Photosynthesis. So the
photos.
movement of carbon dioxide into the from the air spaces between the mesophyll cells into the chloroplast of cells, chloroplast of mesophyll cells is done by the process of diffusion. While in case of oxygen as well, now in case of now if we consider the example of oxygen, now again that oxygen is if it is present between the air spaces of these mesophyll cells, it will move into the mesophyll cells and particularly in mitochondria, that is for respiration, right? Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Or should I explain it more?
Ma'am, could you explain the leaf part? Uh,
Let me tell you.
the one before this.
For example, these are the mesophyll cells. Now, this one we are going to see the movement of carbon dioxide in this, right? And in this we'll see the movement of oxygen, right? What happens now? These are both mesophyll cells, right? Consider both of them as mesophyll cells. Let me write it down. One mesophyll cell and this is the other mesophyll cell. Now you can see empty space, air space between them, right? And consider here we have the chloroplast. Here we have the mitochondria. Is that clear? Now what I was trying to say that here you have carbon dioxide, right? Now carbon dioxide is present in the empty air spaces. It will get inside this plant cell and into the chloroplast for photosynthesis, right? Now this process is done by diffusion. You got it, Mitsam?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And same is the case with other cell as well. Now again, this is an empty space. You have more O2 outside. Now this O2 will enter into this cell and particularly the mitochondria of cell, and that is done for the respiration. And that is also facilitated with the help of the process called as diffusion. Are you clear with this now, Mepsam?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay, what about Numan? Yes, Numan, did you understand?
Ma'am, can you please repeat for oxygen?
That's fine. Okay, let's move. Okay, now we can see in case of okay, now in case of lungs, what happens in case of lungs that we know the molecule that
Alveoli.
needs movement is carbon dioxide, and there is another molecule that needs movement is oxygen, right? In both these cases, for example, in case of carbon dioxide, the movement is from the blood in
To the alveoli.
alveoli, capillaries to the alveolar air space. While in case of oxygen, it's vice versa. It's from alveolar airspace to blood in alveoli capillaries. Okay, now we can see that in this image as well. Now we know that when we inhale air, right, the air we inhale in contains what? It contains oxygen, right? And the air we exhale out comes from, sorry, contains carbon dioxide, right? Now this is an image of one alveolar sac. This is an image of one alveolar sac, and this is the blood capillary that is surrounded by this alveoli. So the oxygen moves from this alveolar sac into the blood capillary, while carbon dioxide moves from this this bloodstream into the alveolar sac. We don't need carbon dioxide, but we need oxygen. So we take in oxygen from outside the environment, from our environment, and like where does this carbon dioxide come from? Can anybody tell me?
Ma'am, from respiration.
Yes, as a product of respiration. So it's removed from the body as a waste product, right? Now there's a question that where does the energy for diffusion come from, right? Okay, could you tell me like where does that energy for diffusion come from?
Ma'am, isn't diffusion independent of an energy source because it moves down the gradient, concentration gradient?
But like there must be some energy within the particle because the particle has to move, right? So we know that the particles they move randomly all the time, right? And we know that the particles, the energy for diffusion, it comes from kinetic energy of this random movement of molecules and ions, right? We know that the particles, they are constantly moving randomly. So the energy for diffusion, it comes from the kinetic energy of that random movement of molecules and ions. That is how they can move from one place to another. Right? Suppose here I can make an image of, let's suppose here you have a container or a beaker, and inside that container or beaker, you have the gas molecules, right? Now, what do these gas molecules they are doing inside this beaker or a container? Now, this is a closed container of beaker, so we know that these molecules they are in constant random motion, and these are in constant random motion because of the kinetic energy that they possess. Is that clear, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Suman, is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Now we have to see that what are the factors that influence diffusion. The first one is the surface area to volume ratio, right? The other one is distance. The next is temperature. And the last one is the concentration gradient. Right? So these are the four factors that influence the diffusion of particles. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Now we have to see them step by step. The first factor that influences diffusion is surface area to volume ratio. For example, we can say the bigger a cell or structure is, the smaller its surface area to volume ratio is. And that is going to slow down the rate at which substances move across its surface, right? Now, many cells, we know that there are many cells that are adapted for diffusion. What do they have? What adaptation do they have? That they have increased surface area.
I'm like alveoli
Good. They have increased surface area in some way.
and intestines as well, the villi.
Yes, you are right, Mipsam. We can have the we can have an example of root hair cells in plants. Then we can have an example of the cell lining in the ileum in animals. Now, what happens in case of these root hair cells? That they absorb water
Water
and
through
mineral
osmosis and
ions.
then minerals. Minerals
Yes,
through active.
mineral ions. And in case of cell lining, that absorbs the products of digestion, right?